System. I'm president of Datalink Networks, and I am joined here by a very special guest, Mr. Steve Henn from ORRIOS. He's the senior vice president at ORRIOS that provide compliance and security InfoSec solutions. Welcome, Steve.
Hey, Don. Thanks for inviting me on.
So this morning, let's talk about all of the big news that we heard about last week. Colonial Pipeline was hacked, and the cyber criminals got away with close to $5 million in ransom, and in the process, shut down 45% of our consumer gas availability across this country. That's a big hit we took, right?
Well, yeah, it did. And of course, you know, without gasoline, you can't transport things like food and other necessities to the stores. So it has a cascading effect far beyond the simple, you know, lack of fuel in a service station. So that's a big problem. Exposes a lot of vulnerabilities in our system.
Yeah, food doesn't get to market. People don't get to work. People can't go to the doctor. The impact of this, as you say, has spread throughout the economy. It seems to be getting better. We do understand that Colonial turned back systems on in a limited capacity late last week, and hopefully by the end of this week, things will be getting back to normal.
Certainly hope so.
So what we're going to do this morning, Datalink Networks is a systems integrator. We help companies with cloud and security solutions, and ORRIOS is a very important partner of ours that provides both InfoSec consulting and compliance solutions. So I want to dive into what the lessons are, what happened, and what the lessons are. So maybe you can give us kind of a breakdown, Steve, of how this ransom happened with Colonial. What led up to this?
Well, you know, the details are still being examined, but there are a few things that could have happened. The first one, and I think the suspect right now, is that there was an old vulnerability in the system that had been known for a while that was not patched, and DarkSide, or the hackers who implanted the ransomware, took advantage of it. The other potential way that could have happened is sort of through a phishing attack or other ways that they can access the system and then spread it out. Because this was not necessarily a data breach, but a systems hack. Remember what basically they were able to do is to take the systems that operated the pipeline and put the ransomware in those systems. I would suspect it was probably the former, that they exploited a known vulnerability, and that Colonial just did not patch the software as they should have.
So they exploited, we believe, we don't know, but we believe that the cyber criminals exploited a vulnerability within the software that control the pipeline system.
Right. And, you know, again, we don't want to pick on Colonial per se. This is a common problem. Ultimately, they, you know, when you make decisions on information security, cybersecurity, you're making the same sorts of decisions you're making with every other business system. What's the cost of investment? What's the, you know, return on that investment? And like many forms of insurance, using or investing in your cybersecurity posture, you hope that the investment, the way the investment pays off is that you hopefully never have these sorts of incidents. So it's not a direct return like any form of insurance, it's an indirect return. So it's part of the trade-off that they had to make, but it's a trade-off, and it's a situation where a lot of companies make it. It's not just Colonial. You know, I think where the calculus fails in companies, and especially in the middle market, right? Colonial is a pretty large company. They've got a lot of resources, but hackers are starting to really expand their attacks into the small and medium-sized businesses market as well. And so I think that where companies miscalculate is they're they do not understand that the risk of a breach is far higher than they expect. They're sitting there thinking, it's 1 in a million. I don't operate a big business. They're not, hackers are not interested in me, but in fact they are. Obviously Colonial gets a lot of play because it's a big company, a big payoff, but often, Don, you're seeing ransomwares in smaller amounts, $5,000, $10,000 for smaller businesses on the promise that the ransomware will be eliminated once the payoff happens. And I think that is a very interesting situation. We were talking about that just before we went to start to record on that. What was it? I'm trying to remember the statistic you cited on that.
30 to 40% of the ransoms, once they're delivered, the criminals don't decrypt the systems. They walk away. So this is a real problem. Where do you think Colonial went wrong? What could they have done to either prevent this entirely, or what could they have done to prevent this large ransom payment? And what we understand is that the criminals started somewhere north of $50 million and was negotiated down somewhere between 4 and 5 million.
Right. And look, where companies go wrong in general is that they don't take this seriously enough. Cybersecurity and information security is the new IT, right? Where IT was emerging in the 80s as a critical part of your back office system, information security, cybersecurity is emerging right now because the hackers are expanding. It's becoming a bit of a numbers game. And if you don't take this seriously, if you're not, if you do not have a recognized standard or framework that you're conforming to, if you do not have a information security management system that manages the whole program, much like an accounting system manages your finance department, you start to really expose yourselves to vulnerability. And look, sometimes you don't have to be perfect, right? There's that old joke, you don't have to run faster than the bear, you just have to run faster than your buddy. There's that idea that hackers aren't going to. There's a lot of soft targets out there. So if you harden yourself as a target, you are at least deterring the casual hack from your site and moving on. Now, obviously, there's Colonial has a very, very interesting. They have their business model is extremely critical. So a lot of this depends on what your business is about and what information you're protecting and what systems you're protecting. But the fact of the matter is that making yourself a hard target is your first step, and that requires an initial investment, and that has to be made. It's not one of those things that's optional anymore.
So let's talk about that. I mean, let's dive into that. If making yourself if protecting yourself is the name of the game, what specifically can small, medium-sized businesses take away from this incident as lessons? What should they be doing right now to either prevent the attack or to be able to recover from an attack?
Right, that's a great question. So first thing what they need to do is understand where they are. So a lot of times initially, and you know this, we go through gap assessments with clients, understanding here's your current posture, these are the resources that you have available, and then ultimately taking a look at where you want to be. Something interesting that has just come out is there are now a couple of states that actually offer safe harbor provisions to companies who are victims of a cyber attack if they follow a recognized standards such as ISO 27001 or NIST 800-171, which are very robust information security. I expect this to spread. So targeting, using one of those frameworks as a guide to setting up your information security program, I think is critically important. Do you need something as robust as, say, Raytheon Corporation? Perhaps not. But understanding and making conscious decisions on what the right posture for your business is the first step. And then understanding what it takes to get from where you are to where you want to be is, defines the path, the cost, and the timing to make yourself a hard target.
So as part of these security frameworks, ISO 27001 and NIST, are there risk assessments that are part of these standards and frameworks? In other words, as you go down this path, I think it's critical for senior management and board of directors to understand fundamentally what is our risk here. Because you pointed out that one of the basic problems in all of this is that senior leadership, board of directors don't understand that the true risk. They downplay the risk. So how do you start that conversation? How do you really communicate to senior leadership and boards? This is what we're dealing with. This is the risk today to our organization.
Yeah, that's spot on, Don. You always start out with that risk assessment, right? You're always asking some basic questions. Do you do X? Do you have Y? Understanding exactly what you need to protect. For example, there could be systems or information that, aren't necessarily mission critical, are relatively easily replaced. You triage those sorts of things, put them on the bottom list, and focus on the 80 to 90% of your information assets that are critical to your system. I think that, and part of this often is a tabletop exercise on, if disaster happens, what do we do? Right. One of the tricky things about Colonial is the nature of the system that they attacked. Do you require full redundancy for every system, or can you plan it smartly so that you can have mission critical redundancy, but not, which is a little bit more affordable, a little bit more understandable, but you never know the answer to those questions unless you first ask the question.
Right. And if a cyber attack is successful, what's the real cost to a company like Colonial? I mean, the costs are going to mount over the months and years ahead now. You have the direct costs, but you also have the fact that they could be a target for a follow-up attack. You have the loss of business reputation. So there's a lot of different costs that come into play here, right?
Well, and you bring up the other thing is, of course, paying ransomware. They were stuck. I don't think that they really had a choice, which is unfortunate. But paying of ransomware under certain laws is illegal. So there's a whole host of challenges that companies face. There are no good choices, right? There are only trade-offs, and the first thing to understand is to really take take stock of what your systems are, where you're vulnerable, what the cost is to get to make an accurate and reasonable assessment of those trade-offs.
Yeah, and when you stop and think about the fact that, as consumers, we have home insurance, we have automobile insurance, and cyber risk insurance is now becoming quite widespread for corporate America. But the cyber insurance industry is also demanding that companies follow frameworks and follow standards and implement security programs in order for them to offer up policies.
Right, agreed. And not only that, in the case of ransomware, watch out for that policy, because ransomware is often not covered under cyber insurance policies. Most of that stuff is other types of costs associated with a breach.
Mm-hmm. And one of the other aspects to this, Steve, is that when you look at what happened, there were two failures, or could be two failures. The first was that somehow the cyber criminals got through, but an even probably more important failure was that there was no incident response or no disaster recovery sort of plan in place to respond to the attack.
Right. Yes, I would agree. Yeah, 2 levels of failure here.
And I think that is in many ways the lessons for the SMB community that we serve. Number one, cyber attacks can happen to anyone. They can happen through email. They can happen through software vulnerabilities. They can happen with ransomware. So you have to do the best you can to, as you say, make it very difficult for the cyber criminals to get through. But then at the same time, if in fact an attack happens, you got to have a response plan.
Right, absolutely. One thing I wanted to throw out there too is there's often a perception, and you know this as well as anyone, a perception that this is a very, very expensive proposition. The fact of the matter is it isn't, right? Well, one, I would say it isn't as expensive as you think, right? Because there are a lot of companies out there that can help you create programs, offer software and services that are very reasonably priced. So you don't guess the cost, find out, reach out, go through a risk assessment, go through a discovery session, find out what the cost would be. And of course, the flip side is what the real cost is. The real cost is ultimately what it's going to cost to recover if you can, right? Inc. magazine says that 60% of small businesses will fail after a successful ransomware attack. So, what's the cost of that? So we should be, the audience should pick up the phone, call someone, hopefully us, and ask the question, what do I need to do? How much does it cost?
So, and to that point, how do we get started? Someone calls in, and we're going to be focused on trying to understand more about where the vulnerabilities are, right? And how to develop a successful cyber protection program as well as an incident response plan. What's involved in understanding the key vulnerabilities of a company and their info systems?
Well, I think there's 2 parts, right? One is, and I always sort of delineate at the firewall, right? So inside the firewall, there's a whole series of steps a company needs to take. I mentioned a few earlier about, making sure that you have a system in place, that you're working toward a standard so everyone is marching to the beat of the same drummer. Doing those sorts of things internally. Training is incredibly important. Making sure that your employees understand, do not click on links that you don't know, no matter how attractive the offer from the Nigerian prince is to give you money. I think that the second thing, though, and you can talk, I think, more about this, is beyond the firewall too. Endpoint security, understanding through pen testing or other mechanisms, what vulnerabilities you actually have through an example would be very, very helpful, and I think part of a comprehensive look at your vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I mean, you can do simple things with scanning. You can do Nessus scans to see where the vulnerabilities are within your network and how those are tied into critical systems. We see clients that have not bothered to take out old Windows operating systems that are no longer supported by Microsoft and no longer have security patches available. So I think the cyber criminals are really capitalizing on some of the negligence that's going on by people not following a systemic program of vulnerability management, and then having a true backup and data recovery plan where you can roll back in time if in fact ransomware hits. And I think the other thing we need to remember is that ransomware, you mentioned the Nigerian prince, the thieves have gotten way beyond that today, and they are quite sophisticated. And this is a game where, as we continue to build our defenses, they continue to come up with better ways of infiltrating that are quite well. They think about this all the time, and so they continue to change their methods of attacking. And so we have to be on the lookout for that, because it's not going to be the obvious, give me $1 million and I'll pay you $1 million in order for me to get to the U.S. So that happened 10 years ago.
Yeah, and well, yes, I think never ever think that these people are not smart people. They're very, very smart people, and they're business people. Hacking is a very lucrative business. So, thinking about it in those terms, hopefully that crystallizes it for a lot of our audience around taking it seriously. That's how they make their money. These are not, a bunch of kids in a basement, in mom's basement, having fun. This is not that. It is a very, very, very big business.
Nation state, criminals.
Supported. Yep, absolutely.
Supported criminals. So, the other part of this is to really identify where your important information is, where your PII is, where important information critical to the business lives, because you not only have ransomware, but another popular method of the thieves gaining money is extorting businesses and boards with information that they steal. And they threaten to release it out to the public. And in many cases, we've seen over the years, working with the FBI, where that has been the method of attack. They will steal information, lock down systems, and then go back to the company and say, we're going to put this out there. And sometimes, for various reasons, the senior leadership or board, will pay the extortion demand because they don't want it out there.
Right. Well, and again, you bring up a very important point. It's not just your data, of course. It's anyone who has access to your data, either directly or derivatively, right? So your vendors, people you do business with, your professional services firms, right? Your tax firm has a lot of information, your law firm, those sorts of things. One of the more interesting recent cases to show, if you still don't think hackers attack small businesses, the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center is now in the middle of a class action lawsuit because of a breach on one of their law firms of 36,000 patient records. And it was extensive private data, social security numbers, all sorts of information. The law firm was 8 lawyers. Now, they didn't attack the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. They attacked the law firm.
Right.
Because they realized that was the weak link. So when you start to think, and I'm glad you brought this up, when you start to think about your vulnerability, you have to think broader. And you have to start to think about what in my complete ecosystem, my suppliers and other vendors, what information do they have of mine and my potential clients or potential employees? And are they protecting that in a manner that I will find acceptable?
And that's part of the entire compliance review as well. It's not right. Just about your information. It's about the subcontractors that have access to your network, what they're doing, how they're protecting that information and that network access, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So this has been a great conversation, Steve. I think, the real key steps that we should let the viewers think about are what? Let's just summarize those again. What should they do right now, given what they've heard over the last week or two, if they are working in an SMB business?
Right. So the first thing they need to do is to get a handle on what they are doing right now. Is their information security, cybersecurity posture robust and mature? Are they doing the right things? A lot of companies, the answer is going to be, we're maybe doing some, but we're not doing enough. Step 2, give someone a call. Please call us if you'd like to, but give someone a call. The most important thing right now is to get as many businesses secure and in that mindset in that sort of security culture frame of mind, so that we can protect the businesses. You wouldn't leave your car in a parking lot without just locking it as you go into the store. You need to have that same sort of muscle memory with regard to security, and then ultimately make some decisions on where you want to go. How robust? What are the important things? What are you willing to spend? What are the risks that you're willing to take? So those, I would say, are the first three things that companies should do.
Visibility on the problem, and like you say, call us, call other organizations, but call. So you have a better and a deeper understanding of what the risks are and what your company should do in response if, heaven forbid, a cyber attack does occur.